TalkWad.com, the world's fastest growing internet radio network. Please check out all the other great shows on www.talkwad.com. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for tuning in.
She has a wonderful personality. She really does.
You are listening to Talking with Gloria.
Let's take a walk on the wild side.
With your host, Gloria Ponziano.
Well, hi everybody, and welcome to Talking with Gloria. As you can tell, there's nobody in the studio with me tonight, but boy, do we have some power in the house tonight. We have coming to us all the way from Queensland, Australia, is author, teacher, sage, Michael Rhodes. And if you didn't hear my last interview with Michael, I would really encourage you to go to the archives and check out the first interview that I had with Michael. And he is joining us now. Hi, Michael. How are you?
Hello, Gloria. I'm very good, thank you.
Great. I am so excited, and I have so many people that have been excited about this next interview because your last one was so phenomenal. And Michael and I were talking at the start of the show before, while we were doing a sound check, about a couple of different topics that we want Michael's opinion on. We just want to delve into some things. And right now, the hottest thing that people are talking about, I think the greatest buzz, is what's going on with the Pope stepping down. And we kind of want your opinion a little bit on what is your take on that with what's happening. Well, I know what you told me, but I'd like you to tell our listeners. What's your thoughts on the Pope stepping down?
Well, quite honestly, I mean, to me, when I've seen the Pope on television, he rather looked to me as if he was walking dead. So I'm not surprised he's stepping down, because clearly he's not a well man. And on that level, I can understand it. But I also think the Catholic Church is staggering a bit from all the sexual problems they've had with priests and boys through the years. And I think there's an enormous backlash against them. It's pretty well known that in third world countries, Catholicism is increasing, but in Western world, it's rapidly decreasing.
Right.
People are moving away from it. The problem is with religions, you know, the birth of religions was designed really to kill spirituality, because human beings have a natural spirituality. You find it in the most primitive of people. You find it in the going back into ancient histories, long before there's anything called religion. They worship the sun, they worship the moon, the Wicca, which is still quite active in Britain and parts of Europe, and people who had a spiritual relationship with nature. Well, along came religion and basically killed that. It killed that relationship with a greater world around us. And what it also did was create a dependency. So people were gradually compelled to depend on a religion for their, shall we say, conversations with God, for their relationship with a greater world around them, the natural world. Mm-hmm. And that religion, it doesn't do that. It doesn't do that. All it is about is a form of control, just another form of control. There's no doubt pretty much that most wars in the world are based in religion, religious intolerance,
right,
religious bias. There's a lot of things I could say about that, but I really don't think I should say on air.
No, and I don't want you to be in a position, I don't want either of us to be in a position where there's any kind of a backlash, because that's not what I'm talking about. What I'm referring to is, I think it's a great thing. I mentioned this prior to the show, that I think it's a good thing that mankind, human beings, get to a place where they're not dependent on somebody else to help them find their connection to God, because you can really get sidetracked, and you learn to shut down that inner voice that's within you, that is your connection to God, to spirit, to higher power, and you begin to rely on somebody to tell you what is right, what is righteous, what is sin, what is not, and then you've got the whole guilt thing coming in because you blew it, and now God's upset with me, and that's why all these bad things are happening to me. So you have a lot of that going on, and I think the only reason that I brought up the Pope is because there are so many people that are concerned about their faith. And I remember seeing this back in and I don't know if you remember this, Michael, but I remember back in the early 80s when on the Protestant side, we had the fall of the PTL Club and the Jim Baker scandal, and he went to jail, and you might be familiar with that. So we're seeing that again.
I remember reading about it, yes. But I mean, in this so-called New Age, we're replacing it with channeling. And so once again, people in the New Age, Lazarus said this, or somebody else said that, Abraham said that. So in a way, we're still in exactly the same boat with a different name.
Oh, I'm so glad you said that.
The same game. So many people are. It's just the same game, just a different take on it.
So what would you suggest, or what do you suggest to people that come to listen to you talk? Now, let me back up and just reiterate what I'm asking here for my audience. You just said that whether they're listening to some New Age guru or Abraham Hicks, we're still in the same boat we were before, and that is having somebody else outside of ourselves lead us into behavior modifications or ways to act, or I don't want to say as extreme as drinking the Kool-Aid with Jim Jones, but it's basically the same thing. You can't think for yourself. You can't have that connection with God. And I think that everybody has that connection. I think we're born with it.
I think you'll find that this is what I would call, anyway, as far as I'm concerned, the human spirit is let's go back to the basics. The human spirit is a great spirit. There's no question in my mind whatsoever about this. The human spirit is great, but it's designed to be independent. So stepping right back, we get the idea that we're body personalities with a soul, but that's completely wrong. We're a soul with a body personality, and that soul is immortal. And so that soul continues to incarnate on the path of its spiritual journey, because that soul is the expression of spirit. And so over many millennia now, there's been a deep brainwashing going on, a programming, a conditioning. Conditioning is the word. And humans have become conditioned to depend. We've developed a deep dependency. And every time we're born, once again, that is recreated by depending on our parents. And so when we grow up, we've already once again recreated dependency as regards to the parental one. And generally that continues through a life. What we really need to do is to, when we grow up, and sure, to be dependent on our parents in the young stages. That has its beauty as well, that we can depend on them. But when we grow up and leave our parents, that we then develop independence. You go to school, a lot of schools have the same school uniform. Mm-hmm. And so that's a uniform behavior, conform. And then you see in many teenagers the absolute rebellion of this. And I see that in body piercing and in some of the crazy fashions we have. Right. I'm not criticizing that, but to me, that's a rebellion away from what is so-called normal. It's like, the world I'm in, people would call me an alternative. Personally, I think I'm appropriate, and the rest of the world, the way it's run, is the alternative. People like us, we're the appropriate people. Mm-hmm. The rest is the alternative. Anyway, going back to this, so we have to therefore become, to have the courage to think for ourselves. Now, this gets difficult because, again, going back through quite a long time now, dependency has an effect on the human body. We become conditioned. So what dependency does it takes away some of the activity from the pineal and pituitary glands in the brain. And so gradually, over a long time, the pineal gland has been atrophying very slowly, but slowly atrophying, because one of the stimulants for the pineal is self-reliance, to make your own decisions, to be self-reliant, to look at the world through your own eyes, to realize that everything you see is a fraction of what is there. And when your pineal is fully active, this becomes incredibly obvious that the world we see through our five senses is like the four walls and the lid of a prison. And when your pineal is active, your prison is gone and you see a greater reality. Now, in more recent years, there have been fluoridation of water that calcifies the pineal and causes deep atrophication. Plus, we're becoming more and more, in America, it's talked about all over the world. The Bush time, there was created a doctrine of fear. And Michael Moore did his movie on this thing of fear. You cross over into Canada and there was a different behavior pattern. Fear also atrophies the pineal. And so gradually this has been going on. And so people today, how do they become independent when their water supply, when their food, when much of the food we eat and much of the drinks we drink, all are basically, and I wonder, is it designed to attack, to atrophy the pineal gland? In a way, that religious dependency and governmental dependency, and here there's no criticism implied, I'm just talking about what is happening. All that dependency is to our detriment as human beings. So, I mean, soon as we have a flood here, the first thing the headlines of the paper say, who is to blame?
Right.
That is typical of a human beings have become dependent on somebody, so then they can get angry and blame somebody.
Well, so I hear what you're saying when you say that we need to become a society that is becoming more independent, but yet at the same time we live in a society where the government wants us more dependent. And a question that I have for you is, people like yourself and me, I speak and do speaking engagements, and you travel, you're about to start your tour, and you're out teaching people. So where does that fit in with helping people to be independent? And yet, like, I go and I speak with people and I speak with groups and I try to bring information and knowledge to get them to a place where they can think for themselves and make decisions on themselves and trust their higher self and the inner voice, which I believe is God. And so am I falling into that category of like the Abraham Hicks by teaching, or is that still helping people to be independent?
This is an interesting question, because I mean, I'm very aware that as I travel the world, I'm talking to people who are open and receptive to what I'm saying. In the Netherlands last year, I was talking to about 50 or 80 people, and a group of 6 or 8 had come there to hear something quite different. And they were completely threatened and challenged by what most of the people there considered to be normal. They were threatened and challenged because we were talking about an illness, and I said, you know, we create our reality, and that includes health.
Mm-hmm.
They were completely threatened and challenged by that. There was no openness. And so this is where it begins. You have to open yourself to life. And we don't. We defend and close ourselves to life. People use the words all the time, I believe this, I believe that. And when you hear that, you know you've got a person who has a set of beliefs that are not serving them, but they're not yet prepared to change them.
Ooh.
In the world, you're finding a sweeping energy of change. You know, that's something I might have mentioned last time, but after the 2012 that everybody thought was a non-event was in fact a huge event. And there is change sweeping the planet, and more people are are beginning to look at the world and realize that there's something going on. The violence, the craziness of humanity, the rate of our pollution, everything like that.
And at the same time, it seems like that people are waking up as well.
There is signs of people waking up because the popularity of people like me is spreading. When I go out as a speaker, I never ever imply you should do as I do. My philosophy is very simple. If it works for you, keep doing it.
That's right.
If it doesn't work for you, stop doing it. Self-criticism, it doesn't work. Most of what people are doing for themselves doesn't work, so they turn to a government. And so we therefore have to look at, well, okay, what is the basis of this? I'm an immortal being. I'm a soul. This soul is metaphysical. So I'm a metaphysical being on a metaphysical journey. Now, everybody thinks that the world is a physical world. Yes, there is a physical world here that is held in linear time. That's one reality, but it's not the only reality. There is another reality, and the principle of this is the metaphysical always precedes the physical. If you get ill, always on a metaphysical level, that illness was there first. And it's possible that it could be cured before it reached the physical body, but we won't go into that.
Okay.
The metaphysical, we live in a metaphysical world, so the tree you see physically is not the only tree. That tree is you could say, the metaphysical, let's put it this way, when you're looking at nature, you're looking in a mirror that is the physical reflection of a metaphysical nature. That includes us. And so I've been into forests that have been completely cut down, and I've also seen the whole forest still standing there, because they could take away the physical, but they couldn't take away the metaphysical. That will only depart in its own timing. Many people who lose a limb feel the old limb there. But what has happened is the physical limb has gone, but the metaphysical limb is still there, because you can't mutilate that metaphysical. The physical is the counterpart of the metaphysical. So when you begin to accept that the world is far, far bigger and far greater and of far more depth than we see, one of the problems is we have become a very, very left brain dominant race of human beings. Probably 85% of the world's population. The left brain says, I want to understand. The left brain wants to understand information. Right brain will embrace information in a completely different and holistic way. So left brain doesn't see the world as in a holistic way. Right brain and whole brain see the world in a holistic way. Now you can't reconcile these both. You can be a whole brain person and you see the world as holistic and you see the separations of it, and you can act and move through the world in a very different way. But when you're very left brain, you're dominated by beliefs, I've got to understand, etc., etc. The left brain cannot embrace the mystery of life. The mystery of life is vast. Now, when you realize that the world, as we see it through our physical eyes, is physical, but when you lose your physical body and your metaphysical, then you see a metaphysical world. And people like, I was listening to the radio yesterday and they were talking about the end of life, how people are afraid to have a conversation of the end of life. I didn't ring up because it was such a consensus reality conversation. I didn't think that they would take any notice of me, but there is no end of life.
No.
It doesn't. God created life, didn't create death. We've created that. There's not an animal in nature that has any relationship with death at all. Nothing in nature has anything relationship with death. We do. People say you only live once. Well, that's true, but it's for a hell of a long time.
Now, let me ask you something about, I could let you go and just let you get out there as far as you want to go, but I want to reel you back in here with a couple of questions that are pretty simplistic. There's a lot of people that are they need to change the reality. They know it. They know it at an intuitive level. They know it. We're getting a lot of research in now where science is showing us that the brain, the frontal lobe is much larger than it's ever been. So our creativity is greater if we would just tap into that. So there's a whole lot of things happening in people's lives. And yet I see so many people now, right now, when I say now, I'm talking about within the last couple of years, people are in more of a state of panic than ever before. We're seeing such a breakdown of so many different things on so many different levels, whether it's spirituality. We were talking about the Pope at the start of the program. We see what's going on in the governments. We see the chaos in the world. We see the climate changes. In fact, I heard something yesterday about due to the solar flares that's been happening, solar storms from the sun, it's actually affected the jet stream around the earth. Therefore, we've got all this crazy, bizarre weather that we're having. It was 32 degrees here in Florida, South Florida, a couple of days ago in the morning. And that's just rare. So people are wondering what's going on. How can I change my world? When it comes to health, you hear the phrase, the same power that created the body has the ability to heal the body. So there has to be a misalignment somewhere within your being. And then fear, you touched on that briefly, and I'd like you to touch a little bit more on that, Michael, because I think that's what we're dealing with right now with so many people, certainly that come across my path. When I really allow them to talk, they're dealing with a great deal of fear, and that fear often manifests itself as a physical disease. And what are your thoughts on that? I mean, I know, about past lives in our life, our life is never going to end. But let's talk about right now. What can people do to change their lives aside from positive affirmations and thinking positive? Because Lord knows they hear a lot of that, even on my Facebook feed. But what would you suggest for people? What would be the first step if somebody says, I really want to change my life?
It's interesting what you're saying, because you see, when you know you're immortal, where does fear come? How do you have fear? I don't have fear. I've completely left fear behind. I don't feel fear about anything. I don't feel about death or anything, because none of those things are real.
Okay, now our listeners that are listening right now hear you say that.
So
you say, I don't have any fear. How do they get to that place?
If I talk to you about fear, you're going to find this is going to sound fairly outrageous. But we'll chance that, because you've probably got a very open-minded audience.
Mm-hmm.
So let's go back to the beginning of times when, what we know about the human race is very, very little and very, very left brain and very, very inaccurate. So if you go back enough eons, you'll find that there was a human race here that were way in advance of us, and they were here at simultaneous times as early primitive humans. And they were here and built civilizations, and they came from, they're like our galactic brothers. They came from a different planet, and they created a civilization. And then there was an event. I'm skipping through this, so I'm going to try to leave out what is the most outrageous. There came an event, an earth event, a major earth change, and most of them and their cities were wiped out. It's interesting to notice that these people were totally fruitarian, vegetarian, never ate meat for eons. There was no war, nothing like that. They were completely peaceful. To this day, we're one of the only species on the planet that cannot create vitamin C in our bodies, because we were so completely and utterly our ancestors, our deepest ancestors, our truest ancestors, and they weren't monkeys. They were vegetarian, fruitarian for so long. We lost the ability completely to synthesize and create vitamin C, and we still don't have it. We're utterly dependent on ingesting it. Okay, that as an aside. This race was almost wiped out. And suddenly they lived in forests and jungles, and I don't mean swinging from trees, I mean in beautiful civilizations, but the event was a massive one, and most of that civilization was swallowed up into the earth. Remnants lived, but suddenly they were prey animals because there were species around them. Their forests are gone, and they were in open savanna land trying to survive, and they were being eaten because they didn't know that you should run away with animals with big teeth sticking out of their mouths. And so the brain, the left brain, quickly learned to synthesize if you like, a chemical, hormone, metaphysical and physical brew that when the humans felt it, they felt what we call fear. And so they learned to fight, flight, or freeze. They learned to defend themselves. And they learned to fight. They learned to climb trees. They learned to run away. But and gradually they survived. And we'll skip over that. As the eons continued, this hormone, this, shall we just say, this alchemical brew continued. And it created with it and brought with it a lot of aggression. Fear and aggression and anger go hand in hand. And so when we became the dominant species and no longer being killed, we no longer needed fear. It didn't need it, but it continues to this day. And so we then started killing each other. And when we ran out of people to kill, and we're still doing that, then we turned on ourselves and we began to make ourselves. We became our own enemy because we still create fear. And so in fact, we fight ourselves. And I watch it and see it in hundreds, thousands of people every year, people who are fighting themselves. And so fear can be overcome. Krishnamurti and all the great teachers have always known this. You cannot beat fear. Every time I hear somebody on the television, a famous film star, say, I've got cancer, I'm going to fight it, I just think to myself, you're dead.
Yes.
And they, because you can't fight what you create. We create it. Where do we create it from? Our fears. What do we create it from? Self-attack. And every time we have a critical thought about ourselves, it's always a subconscious thought accompanied by a sub-emotional movement, and those sub-thinking and our subconscious and sub-emotions are being programmed over the eons to attack ourselves. And we are the creators of that, and nobody on this planet seems to know it, and the medical professions seem to know nothing about it. And so there's only one way that the human species can survive, because theoretical anthropologists realize that we're on the path to extinction through insanity. That's the simple reality. And I see this happening. And so the only thing that can change us, if we can't change ourselves, which we can do, because I have and many other millions of people have, you have and millions have, if we can't change ourselves, then the earth will go through such a catastrophic change that we will not be able to stay the same and survive. The only way we will be able to survive will be to change, not into survivalists, but to realize our immortality and to let go of fear. You cannot know that you're an immortal being and have fear. They just don't go together.
That's interesting what you just said. You can't fight what you create.
Of course you can't. You create it. You know, I mean, I don't want to get into this. It's a big subject, but we create our own cancers. And then we set about fighting it. And the best that science seems to manage is our body to keep it alive. Now, you know, any moron knows that that's not a good idea, because if consciousness says you cannot, I mean, we are beings of consciousness. How can you fight consciousness to uplift it? So, you know, I know there are ways of healing cancer, but it's illegal for me to say. And so I won't be able to say it over the air, but it boils down to lifting your energy, lifting your spirit, lifting your whole being, lifting who you are into a higher level. So it might be your path for another incarnation, but it doesn't have to be. And so we're a world are fear-filled people. We're fearful. Everybody's fearful. People talk to me, you know, they see a spider. The spider makes me so afraid. A spider doesn't make anybody afraid. It doesn't make anybody afraid. A government doesn't make anybody afraid. We are full of fear. We look out and see it in nature. It isn't there. Animals is not, there is no fear that we have in any animal because our fear is based in our imagination. And people today are taught that imagination is just a load of nonsense. You know, what you imagine isn't real. Nothing could be further from the truth. What we imagine, we will create.
Yes.
So
So if you imagine yourself going into debt, you're going to create debt. If you imagine yourself being well, you can actually heal your body.
You can heal your body. You can delay. We could live far, far longer. We could live hundreds of years. We're doing everything, just about everything, completely wrong. Our program, science knows this. People get to 100 and then die because 100. Well, that was a good score.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to be funny here. There's nowhere else to go. 200 is not possible. And so not a person over 100, but many over 100 rapidly let go then. And so science knows this. So many people die simply of age, not because they needed to die, but because they have told themselves, I'm old. I'm an old person. And everybody in society treats them like they're old people. They are so old, they're going to die.
And this is what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to get to a certain age, and after that, it's like, well, nobody's ever pushed this envelope, so I got to die.
To give you an example, in Russia, when the Iron Curtain was down and you couldn't go in there, many people in peasant villages where the elders were revered and honored, they lived to be 120 and 130. This is fact,
right?
Simple fact. Because in the village, they were given the position of the revered elders. Then the curtain came down and the Western world went in. And now they're dying at 100 and in their 90s because their villages have changed and young people have television and they no longer revere or even give any credibility to age. And so down is coming their age. What do? As soon as a person's 50 or 60, stick them in a retirement village.
Mm-hmm. They start telling them they're over the hill.
Yeah, when you mix age with age, you age. When you mix age with youth gets wisdom, age gets youthful.
Oh, I like that.
So we just do it. We got the whole plot wrong. The one species on this planet has so completely lost the plot that we actually think you can fight for peace. I mean, what moron believes you can fight for peace? You can fight to end a war, but you've already sown the seeds of the next one, and we've been doing it back into our history as far as anybody can follow. We've been doing it, and we still haven't got peace yet.
Well, I believe Mother Teresa was the one that said they asked her if she would march with them back in the 60s during the Vietnam War, if she would march with them on Washington to march against the war and, to fight against peace. And she said, no, I won't march with you. But when you march for peace, I won't march against the war, but when you march for peace, I'll be there. So it's the flip side of the coin. I mean, you have to look at both sides of what you're saying. And a lot of people say things, Michael, going into the power of words now. People don't realize, they're not aware of the amount of energy that comes out of their mouth, basically, through words, because words reflect your thoughts, and your thoughts reflect the energy that's going into your heart. Do you agree or disagree?
I agree. Gloria, we live our conversation. It's as simple as that.
Mm-hmm.
And listen to conversations in coffee houses around me, not deliberately, simply because some people speak so loudly you have no choice. And you listen to conversations on telephones everywhere now, because everybody now has the freedom to scream and shout into a telephone as if they're the only person in the room, and listening to their end of the conversation, they tell me a lot about their lives. And I sort of look at them and think, well, I wonder how long you'll be here. So yes, words have incredible power. Like, I love the word beautiful. if you slow it down, be you to the full.
Ooh, I like that too. Boy, you're just full of them today. This morning. I think it's morning in Australia. It's evening here.
It's morning in Australia. Then there's another one, the word interfere, and the word is in to fear. And so once we interfere with the natural flow of life, then we are into fear. And so, look, I grew up and I found my way through all this because when I was a young man, and this was one of the big things that had a huge impact on me, and we're going right into Christianity. I grew up in the Church of England, and so I was, that's what I was, the Church of England, and emigrated, and which is an interesting one, considering Henry VIII created the Church of England so he could have more power and have more power than the Catholics in England. That's exactly why he created it, his springboard for power. And within 100 years, you daren't say you were a Catholic in England because the Church of England became so powerful. And guess who was the head of the Church of England when he created it? You got it, Henry VIII. That is people's springboard for spirituality that was created purely out of power, which is, utterly ridiculous. And now I've forgotten where I was going anyway. What was I going to say?
Well, we were talking about interfere, and then
yeah. So anyway, the power of words is it's very strong. One of the most common words you hear is I can't, and I can't afford. Now this gets very interesting. People say I can't afford. So this sounds crazy, but think about it. Cities are full of shops, big windows, filled with beautiful things. Every day, tens of thousands of people in every city, millions upon millions of people around the world walk around those cities, look in the shop windows and think and say, I can't afford. They see what they want, but they can't afford it. It would be a very, very common thing. Do you think it's therefore a coincidence that poverty is rapidly spreading around the world?
No. We're creating it out of a mass consciousness.
Mass consciousness creates mass reality. I'm not in mass consciousness, so I don't experience mass reality. You're not in it. Many people are not in it, but the mass is. Maybe 10, 15% is not in it. So the other 85% is in it, and they're what the world call the normal people. I have a different word. I won't go into that.
Yeah, we'll leave that one alone.
And so I can't afford. So what happens, we're taught by television to want. We're taught to want, and we're taught to want things we can't afford. It's a design going on. The whole thing is a design. I don't believe any of this is by accident. Nothing by accident, nothing by chance. Humanity is being led into the place of such deep dependency that there'll be one day, the idea is to have a one world order. So everybody's under control and nobody will be free. Nobody will know what freedom is. Well, they might be able to do that to you physically, but nobody can control your spirituality unless you give it away. And that's where religion comes in.
Religion teaches also, there's a great deal of buzz going on right now in the Christian arena of the end times, the apocalypse, the mark of the beast, and especially with the rippling effect of what's going on in the Vatican. So Christianity is screaming, we're at the end of days. We're at the end of time. Christ consciousness and Christ is going to return. What are your thoughts on that?
Christ as a single person, that won't happen. But the Christ consciousness is returning. Everything I'm talking about is the Christ consciousness. The living Christ has never gone away. The living Christ has always been here. But the living Christ has always been metaphysical and has always been there for people who spiritually attune with that Christ energy. So the church represents it as one person. It isn't one person. It's not one man. It's within the soul of all humanity. The soul of every human being and Christ consciousness walk hand in hand if they want to. of course, so many souls let go of the hand, but the other hand still stays there waiting for once again when they take hold of it. And so the only way, as I was saying, to change human beings is to take away everything that stabilizes their life. Everybody wants security and stability. What wants that? Fear. If I'm stable and secure, I won't be frightened. And so the more stable and secure humanity becomes, the greater the fear grows, and the more unstable and insecure humanity is. How's that for the paradox?
Wow.
So the whole thing is breaking down. I travel metaphysically. I've been back and spent quite a lot of time metaphysically with the time of hunter-gatherers. Now, the energy on the planet was completely different then. Today, there is literally on this planet a fear, negative energy that is like a shroud hanging over the planet. It's interesting because for the last 300 years, the magnetic field of our planet has been weakening.
Right.
It's weakest now than 300 years. Always before we have a polar shift, always first the magnetic field has to weaken. Now the sun reverses its north and south poles every 11 years, approximately. Generally, we reverse ours around every 400,000 years, approximately, give or take a few tens of thousands. It's nearly 800,000 years since there was known to be a polar shift on Earth. And so now we're definitely heading toward that polar shift. It could be tomorrow, it could be another 1,000 years. But it's no longer a question of if, it's absolutely a question of when.
Yes, I've seen enough programs on television about the polar shift, and they say the same thing. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. Let me ask you something on that.
So
what would happen to civilization if there's a polar shift?
This is interesting, isn't it? Civilization, we don't have a civilization. We have a very uncivil way of living. When I go to the hunter-gatherers, then I see civil people who have no wants. All they do is they have clans, and it all works because each one is responsible for the whole. And they all know that. They're all responsible for the family unit and for the clan, and it works beautifully. They all give to the whole, and therefore they can take from it. Humanity today takes from the whole. Nobody tries to give to it. Well, of course, some do. And so it's all take and it's very little give. And so if we had a shift, what it would do is, we're immortal. And so nothing's going to happen no lives will come to an end, as no life has ever come to an end, not in any war, in any situation. No life has ever ended because God created life and did not create death. And so no life is but what it would do, it would completely annihilate the way that we have. In other words, it would smash the illusions. Now, I feel, and what I teach is, I say to people, go ahead in your life, break the illusions and find the greater reality. Because according to your state of consciousness, if there was a massive polar shift, according to your state of consciousness is how life will be. That's how life will be for you. In other words, it says in the Bible, and it's a misquote of the Bible, a shocking misquote, but basically it's saying this: 1,000 fall to your left and 1,000 to your right, but according to your own state of consciousness shall you be treated. And exactly that's how it is. We create our reality. It's as simple as that. And no outside interference will ever create a different reality than the one you created. And so what I'm saying, literally, and I mean this sincerely, you could be in a city where the whole city is collapsing around you, or there is a tsunami racing through it, smashing everything down, the tsunami 200 meters high. And if you can stand and face that tsunami and say, I choose love, and although you're frightened, and that's permissible, you stand and even walk toward it because there's nowhere to run away. And running away will take you into one reality, whereas walking toward it, two things could happen. One, you could ascend in that moment before the wave hit you, and you move into a complete dimensional shift, or two, your body is pulverized and you walk away from it as a metaphysical being into a greater and higher reality. Thinking to yourself, wow, that was a good trade. My body was about worn out.
Let me ask you something. You've mentioned this on the last show that we did, and you've mentioned it a couple of times here for our listeners that are tuning in for the first time. You've mentioned your metaphysical travels when you go back in time and to the hunter-gatherers. Now, for some people, that might be hard for them to wrap their brain around. It's like, okay, so is he talking about reincarnation? What is this metaphysical travel? So that's one question. Explain to our listeners what you mean by metaphysical travel. And the second part of that question would be, what would be the purpose in you going back in time and going back to the hunter-gatherers? What are you gathering? What kind of information are you gathering by doing this kind of travel?
The answer to your second question is read my books.
I do. I'm playing devil's advocate here, for lack of a better word now. I've got your books.
I mean, to your listeners, if they read my book Through the Eyes of Love, they will glean everything that I get from these metaphysical travels. Okay, I said earlier that we're metaphysical beings. This seems to have slipped away from human reality. We are immortal souls. We have a body which is mortal, but we do not die. And so what is that part of us that is not physical? I mean, even physically, do you know that you're 99.9% space? Mm-hmm. So all the amount of your physical body adds up to 0.01% of your whole body is in fact real. And so forgetting that, you're a metaphysical being. Now, everybody knows that that you can learn to do astral projection, or OOBEs. The Monroe Institute have been teaching for years, OOBE, out-of-body experience. I would like them to teach somebody to have an in-body experience for a change. Quite apart from that. Now, that says that when you go to sleep, and I'll briefly go, every time you go to sleep, when you go into REM, rapid eye movement sleep, your astral body leaves the physical. This is well known. But what doesn't seem to be so well known is that when you've got an active pineal, I find that I can sit down and I can take my consciousness away from my physical body, and I can move out. And as soon as you move out of the physical body, you're into a greater reality. And in a greater reality, all time occupies the same moment. So there is no linear time once you're out of your physical reality. And so I've done it for so long now that I can have my physical body sitting down, wide awake, even writing what I'm experiencing on a metaphysical level. I have to admit, I began as
What's
a
the
child.
difference between that and a very active imagination?
The difference is active imagination is one of the pathways to reach this. You see, we've used imagination to create a prison. We went in, imagined ourselves locking the door, and threw the key away. A long while ago, I imagined myself opening it. I'll tell you how that happened. A long time ago, when I was much younger, I came across this thing that I was going to mention. That's where I lost myself, Christian. And it was this saying of Jesus, seek ye first the kingdom of heaven, and all else shall be added unto you. Now, I knew that I and everybody I knew was seeking first everything that could be added unto us, and the little bit of time left over was based on the kingdom of heaven. For Christians, that meant going to church on Sunday morning or Sunday evening. For New Agers, that meant meditating once or twice a day for 20 minutes. But that's not what he said. And in my deepest heart, deep down, I knew this was a truth. Seek you first the kingdom of heaven. I learned eventually that the kingdom of heaven is a state of consciousness. There's no place, it's a state of consciousness. So first, seek ye first the heavenly state of consciousness, and all else is added unto you. I knew that was a truth. And so I dedicated the next 30 years of my life to that. So that was what I put first and foremost in everything I did, what I thought about what I did. Of course, I do it better now than I did at the beginning, but it is a truth. And when you open that, when you find the kingdom of heaven and step into it, everything you need is added unto you, and you let go of the wants. And so this is so far away. Even the Christians, I mean, they read such things, but they just don't get it.
Well, some of them do. I think that some Christians, I know I have quite a few Christian friends, and there's also a group that kind of fit in the middle. They do accept the scripture, and some believe that it's been distorted throughout the generations. And you use that example of seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you. And so Christians would take what you just said as, okay, you said part of the word, but you left out seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added. See, there's where people begin to split hairs, and they begin to, now wait a minute, you didn't get it exactly right. Well, nobody gets it exactly right. Not even the scripture is exact. But yet people make doctrines out of it, and it causes that separation between mankind. And
I believe I read once, Gloria, that the time the Bible reached the English language, it had already been translated 15 times.
Wow.
How much is lost in translation? Anyway, so metaphysical, let's go back to that.
We got 3 minutes, Michael, just so you know.
Metaphysically traveling means that, yes, there is imagination. Our imagination is completely unique to us. People need to realize not a single animal has got a human imagination, nothing like it, not even vaguely, just as well for us, perhaps. I mean, if rats had imagination, we wouldn't be here. We're outnumbered so many thousands to one. So we have imagination. With your imagination, you can create pathways. William Blake, they all discovered this. Mm-hmm. The imagination is the pathway to discovery. There is a point where your imagination meets a greater reality. And then you surrender to the greater reality, and it just takes you along. Imagination kickstarts the pineal gland. We need it. Movies take it away. Everything we watch and video and all that, they take it away because there's nothing left to imagine. Books create it because everything you read in a book, you have to imagine.
Right.
And so it's amazing how so much of our modern technology is taken away from us, not giving to us. Everybody thinks it's giving to us. It's doing the opposite. It's taking away. It's making life easier, but it's not. It's taking away the qualities of our birthrights, the qualities of our telepathy. We won't do it because we bypassed it. So many things like that. So when I journey metaphysically, I'm aware that I can now step between, and I step into places, and I'm seeing things that I didn't know. I'm learning things that I didn't know. So when I went I was wanting to find out, when did the left brain become so dominant? And what I just went back to the hunter-gatherers, and even there, the left brain was dominant. But every tribe that was the most successful, every clan that was most successful, every family, the leader and the man and the woman, there's always two, and they weren't necessarily married at all. Generally, the woman was an older woman and the man was a young, strong man. But the ones that were successful were always whole brain. The woman and the man were whole brain. Even if most of the tribe was slightly left brain dominant, they still acted from a whole brain. And I visited tribes which were clearly collapsing, and it was always when they were collapsing, they had a left brain dominant, particularly the male was always left brain dominant. And many times a woman wasn't, she was right brain dominant or whole brain, and the man would overrule her, and those tribes were collapsing. And when they collapsed, they were gone quickly. They didn't.
Well, and we're seeing that. We've only got one more minute here, so I'm going to have to wrap this up. I hate to, because I love to have conversations with you and just let you just share with whatever is in your heart at the time. But in 1 minute or less, what would you leave our listeners with? What would you like them to strive to do to help to change the planet, help to change their lives? What bit of advice would you give them?
Change the planet. The planet's going to look very well looked after. You don't have to change your life. All you have to do is change your relationship with yourself. Your relationship with yourself is your relationship with life and your relationship with every human being. If you can learn to like yourself and then to love yourself and to be respectful and appreciative and respect yourself, you'll find that troubles just run away from you and disappear. Your relationship with yourself is your relationship with life. It will absolutely reflect life, your relationship with yourself. Criticize yourself and you'll have a critical life.
Wow, that is fantastic. That was a great finish right there. Learn to love yourself, learn to like yourself, and when you do, you're going to put out that kind of energy to the planet. You're going to begin to change your sphere of influence. We may not be able to change the whole world, and sometimes that's what people do. They look out at their world or at their communities, and they're like, "Oh my gosh, it's just too big, the problem is too bad, too far gone, overwhelming." If we just focus on ourselves, loving ourselves, and then loving those that are in our sphere of influence and start there, it's just one step at a time. And that's how the planet, that's how civilizations, that's how our communities, that's how our families, that's how our friends, that's how things begin to change. We start with us. Instead of pointing a finger outward, we begin to point it inward and focus on changing ourselves. If you have not read any of Michael Rhodes' books, I really encourage you to go to michaelrhodes.com or Facebook them. And you definitely want to find them on Facebook and like them, like their page, because Michael has what he calls Michael Musing. And that's something you definitely want to have coming into your Facebook feed. It's fantastic. You get a little shot of Michael every day when he writes. And Michael, I hope that you will grant me another interview sometime in the near future. I know you're getting ready to do a great deal of travel. We've only got about 30 seconds here. So when do you start traveling?
March. 14th of March.
14th of March. Well, we wish you safe travels, much success in your talks. For those of you that have just tuned in to Talking with Gloria for the first time, I hope you'll join me next Wednesday and same time, 6:30 p.m. every Wednesday night. And again, like me on Facebook and Michael Rhodes as well. Michael, thank you so much. My love to Carolyn, your wife.
Thank you very much, Gloria. Thank you very much.
Have a great day.
Sure will.
Okay. Bye now, Michael. Okay, thanks everybody for joining me, and we'll see you next Wednesday night at 6:30 p.m. Have a great week, everybody.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for tuning in.
She has a wonderful personality. She really does.
You are listening to Talking with Gloria.
Let's take a walk on the wild side.
With your host, Gloria Ponziano.